Timo, thanks for joining me on the SteadFast Running podcast.
Oh, glad to be here.
You are one of the best coaches in the country. The results that you've posted over the past 10 plus years at the high school level speak for themselves. You've also mentored many other coaches, myself included, and I think it's worth mentioning because it speaks to the kind of person you are that a few years ago, I emailed you out of the blue asking a question about Lydiard training, and you responded right away, providing a template of your weekly training structure. And you didn't even know who I was, only that I had a sincere desire to learn from the best. So I'm really grateful to have you here so that we can continue to pass this knowledge forward to anyone who might be listening. So Timo,
Well,
first
thank you.
question. You've been coaching since 1988, at least, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
After all this time, what still excites you about coaching?
I like being with the boys every day, especially when the kids that invest in their training and just seeing them improve. And once they start striving for excellence in that, and they make that their goal, they can accomplish a tremendous amount. A lot of times I think we don't expect enough from our kids or give them the tools to be able to achieve great things. I always tell my boys, you can't be afraid of being great.
Yeah, I feel the same way. What keeps the wheels turning for me is the love for the sport and for the athletes that we coach, born firsthand from experience as a runner and the joy of watching someone else get a taste of that. Is there a reason that you chose high school coaching apart from the fact that you are a math teacher and the two just go really well together?
When I was in college and I decided I wanted to coach, that led me to change my majors from engineering to mathematics. And they both do tie in because math is a challenge and running is a challenge. And I think that to want to do something that would constantly challenge me, and of course, teaching math, trying to get kids, once again, get my students to invest in their future, to invest through mathematics, is a giant challenge. Same as trying to get kids, especially young kids, are coming out for cross country or track for the first time, and they really don't know how to expend themselves into something that they can do. So many kids come in and they think it's just jogging a few miles a day. And it's like, well, we want to be greater than that. So we're going to do more than just jog a few miles a day. So it's the challenge of trying to get them to accept that they can be great, whether it's teaching or coaching.
And you took up the challenge, like many kids do today, in middle school. And by the end of your senior year in high school, you were the school's 3,200-meter record holder, right? And
Yeah.
in addition to that accomplishment, what else is worth highlighting in general about your high school running experience?
Looking back now, I mean, I've had so many kids that are faster than I ever was in high school. It's kind of interesting. But for me, just the progress of, I was varsity my freshman year in cross country, but we didn't have the greatest team. But the next year we had a really good team and I was still varsity. And then I moved after my sophomore year, across state in Illinois, and I was still able to make varsity and continuously improved. And I'm just grateful I had coaches that um, had philosophies that would allow you to continuously improve, and prepare for college and collegiate running at the same time.
When did you reach your peak as a distance runner?
Um, Actually, in my late 20s, I was still getting um, PRs about age 27, 28. And then I contracted bronchitis from living in Salt Lake City, and it caused me to get exercise-induced asthma. And that was a struggle. And it's still, I've been over 30 years on an inhaler. And so I've had, good races for my age, but that was about it, 27, 28.
And what were some of your best times? I'm curious, like your personal bests at 5K and even all the way up to the marathon.
5K was 15:10 at altitude. So that's somewhere between 1440 and 1448 at sea level. Um, when I was real young, I did, like 20, I ran a 240 marathon. 10K was in the 32s, but I was still running in the 34s in my late 40s, early 50s. So I was competitive until my early 50s.
And you mentioned those health problems. How did your relationship to running evolve as you got older? And how did you come to terms with the inevitable age-related decline in running performance when you could no longer be as competitive as you once were?
Well, that's the cool thing about USATF has, in masters, you have 5-year age groups. So, when I was 38, I was really looking forward to turning 40 to finally be in masters. Now 35 is masters, but back then 40 was masters. And it really sparked in me a desire to learn a lot more about training and how I could get better at getting my athletes faster. Um, and I was doing a lot of guinea pigging on myself at that age. And yeah, my 40s from about 38 to about 52, I loved racing and I loved training with the boys. And as you get older, instead of running the workouts with them, you're timing them and running the warm-ups and the cool downs and the intermediate runs. I was still doing long runs till maybe age 51, 52. Now I bicycle. I bike along with them. And so, things change in that effect, but you can always be a part of practice. And that's what I think kids need. They don't want someone to send them on a run. You don't know what they're doing. But I can be there I like sending them off, and then as I bike up, talking to each kid as I get up to the front. And so that way, one, you can discuss with them things you want to individually, but also lets them know that they're valuable to the team.
What is your running schedule like these days? In addition to biking, do you do any running?
No, I bike to school early in the morning. We have 6:30 morning run. So I'll bike with the boys on morning run, then I'll go out and get some extra mileage in because I'm retired from teaching. I retired 2 years ago, right when COVID hit, and go for a long bike ride. And then in the afternoon, we'll go back. I'll bike to practice and bike with the boys and then bike home. So I try to get between 2 and 3 hours of ride time every day. The goal is minimum of 120 miles a week on the bike.
And when you were competitive as a masters runner in your 40s, 50s, did you focus mostly on the track?
No, I think most of the time it was, there are very limited opportunities on the track for masters. I mean, I went to masters nationals at age 40 and 41, but most of the time it's road races and you have your favorite, you have your community road race and your favorites during the summer. I did the coaches 1600 race at the Simplot Games indoors for 20 times in 21 years. So yeah, stuff like that. Cross country races, if there was a coach's race, or I did the open race at Foot Locker West a few times. So there was enough outlets, alumni races at my college.
Now, you were influenced by several great coaches, like you alluded to earlier. We can talk about Coach Angelo, Coach Dyke, Coach Lee, Coach Sherrill, just to name a few. Can we focus on one or two specific things that one of those coaches taught you?
Well, I'll tell you, all four of my coaches were very, all of them had me do morning runs, doubles. And that's something that I think back in the 70s, when I was in high school, that was accepted, that all the good programs did doubles. Now the morning run for us is a 30-minute recovery run. We have a specific pace, for the varsity guys, they might start at average 8-minute pace. If you go too slow, you lose form. They drop their hips and then they start heel striking and develop bad habits. So we try to stay, it's conversational pace, recovery pace. And that's something that all four of my coaches, my two college coaches, my two high school coaches, had us do. All of them, I could say, looking back at my training, both in high school and college, is definitely Lydiard based, with a large emphasis on how I term it, building the aerobic engine. But year round, you're also working, as Lydiard was a proponent of, and a lot of people have a misunderstanding about, that we're doing a nominal amount of speed all year round. It's not just in that one phase, anaerobic phase, where you do it. That's a big misconception a lot of people have about Lydiard training. They just look and they see catchphrases and they think they know what that means, and without really delving in depth into what he specifically said. And he was one who was working on strength and speed year round. That's something my coaches instilled in me.
Knowing what you know now about training, would you have done something differently, or do you think you reached your potential as a distance runner?
I think I got pretty close. I was marginally talented, and my coaches did a great job of, like I said, helping me improve constantly. Even after I started coaching myself, as a coach, definitely, someone once asked me, what motivates you to coach now? And I said, it's regret. Because if I had coached my guys 35 years ago, how I coach my guys now, we would have been extremely, done extremely well and been nationally ranked every year. We didn't get our first state championship till my 22nd year coaching. I was just, I think, caught up in a lot of mistakes of the 80s and 90s of how people thought kids should be coached. It was an era of high intensity and lower mileage, and an emphasis on, I look back and I think the biggest mistake I made was I was thinking that the reason you're fast is because you do a tremendous amount of speed. And that's not why distance runners are fast. It's because they built their aerobic engine. And so they have the capacity to be able to go faster for a longer period of time. And that's definitely, on a coach's call a month ago, I said, if that type of training really worked, then there would be 5,000 really, really good teams in the United States rather than just 80 or 50 or 150.
Let's dig into your coaching resume a bit before we go back to the training talk, which I love and I always say for the end of these conversations, and there's plenty to talk about there. So you have always coached in Utah. First, it
Yeah.
was 10 years at Murray State,
Murray
uh,
High,
Murray
Murray
High.
High School. It's right in the middle of Salt Lake Valley.
And then you made the move to American Fork. And I've heard you refer to that area of the country as the Rift Valley, and for good reason, given that you're almost at 5,000 feet elevation and you have
Yeah, we're
both hills and soft surfaces to run on.
yeah, but also because of the level of excellence in the valley. In our school district, there's 10 high schools, and 5 of them have been to NXN or Running Lane. It's super competitive. Right now, there are 3, 4 teams that have been nationally ranked this year alone, just in our valley. And then if you go in South Salt Lake Valley, there's a couple more teams there, which have been nationally ranked this year or last year.
So would you say it's a combination of the environment? What's creating the excellence, in your opinion?
Um, it started, I mean, there's always been really good teams. Even before I started coaching here, there was teams that were nationally recognized, just a couple really, really good coaches. And then when I started changing up our training and getting away from the stuff that I felt like wasn't working and moving towards the model of coaching that I do now, which was probably around 2004, 2005, 2006. And then it started snowballing. And then I've always been willing to talk to other coaches, especially in our coaches association. I taught at some clinics back in the like 2013, 2012, 2014. And other coaches, I've always been good friends with a lot of the coaches in our state and in our valley, and always been willing, like we go on a coach's run at lunch at track invites and talk training. And I think doing that, we were able to, it kind of spread. They were seeing our success and it's like, what are you doing? How do I improve? I want to be like that. I'm tired of getting beat by Timo's teams. And so now there's a lot of coaches and even though they might be beating us sometimes, I'm I've always been willing to share what I've learned if they're wanting to learn.
Yes, and thank you for that. Case in point here tonight. I heard Coach Mike Smith of NAU talk about the vibes that he looks for and tries to promote within his team. And I thought that was a good way of putting it, the vibes or the way things feel at practice. How do you approach culture, relationship building, setting expectations, and sports psychology in general among high school runners?
Well, I don't know. I'm kind of old school. I tell them the first day when we have our opening social that it's not my job to motivate you. It has to come from inside you. And if you're not willing to motivate yourself, probably want to find another sport. I'll try to inspire you, but the first thing you got to do is you want to learn about our training. And when we go to summer camp, I give them lessons on the basis of our training philosophy and what we do and why we do it, so that they understand that every single thing we do, even the smallest thing like what we do in the weight room, I try to base on scientific principles and on the model that this has worked for us, and the proofs in the pudding. So when they start investing themselves in learning about it, applying it, and then seeing the results, then the rest, you know, I, in terms of team culture, I mean, even when I was at Murray High, we always had a good culture. The kids were best friends. Um, it's just my training for them to get them to a higher level was lacking. And that was on me. And, that's why regret is one of the motivators for me to try to keep improving my coaching, so that I can get boys into college running and that they can continuously improve in their college if they go to the right college that has a good coach that's going to do similar stuff, uh, be aerobic based. And we've had a lot of success with our collegians and now our post collegians. So yeah, the investment by them is the most important thing, and you just have to keep talking about it. And if they don't want to, say, hey, make a choice, do what everybody else is doing, or if you don't want to, go find something else. It's not for you.
When we talk about the mistakes that we've made, the regrets that we have, one thing is training errors that we might make, and then there are other maybe relational stuff. I'm just curious if you've had to learn from any of those types of mistakes, and I'm talking about dealings with an athlete or with a parent or with an administrator or the team as a whole that you've been able to learn from.
Well, every time, a lot of times we change something in our program as a result of a reaction to something that's happened. Um, I look back when I was a young coach, and I definitely was doing too much anaerobic training. Our repeats, our intervals back then were too short, with shorter rests at too fast a pace and too many of them. And that just trashes kids out. And I know that's a typical model for a lot of coaches. It's the model back from the 80s and 90s. And that's the biggest error. Our long runs weren't long enough. Our intermediate runs weren't fast enough. Our repeats were too short. As I said, too fast. And so honing in on what are the paces that we want to hit in each specific workout or run that will maximize the training effect. That's going to improve our aerobic engine the most, so that we can reach this another level. Instead of being 84 minutes for our 5-man team time, now we've gotten down to 75 minutes, with the national record, and 9 minutes difference. There's got to be serious changes in your training in order to do that. And by changing and building aerobic engine, I mean, in 2009, we were the first team to break 80 minutes on the state course for our team time. And that's 16-minute average, and so the national record that we set, now it's, obviously been broken by Newberry Park, but when we set it whenever that was, 2020, 15 minutes. And that was for 5K at sea level. Our 80 minutes was for 3 miles at altitude. So it's a totally different training, but the training we're doing is so much more like the training I did with my high schools back in the 70s, which was linear based. So kind of the circles going around.
Is there a reason you got away from that kind of training? Your coaches in high school and college taught you Lydiard, and then did you go in another direction for some reason?
I think it's when I started coaching. It's the books that were out. I mean, Seb Coe's dad's book, and about Seb was doing low mileage. He was doing all this, but they weren't explaining that they weren't counting all of his warm up and cool down and his morning runs and his everything. And he was actually getting 90, 100 miles a week. And another book I had, Bill Bowerman's high performance training for track and field, and it had a lot of, I don't know, you know, he was a college coach, and you look at what he did with Prefontaine and those, and they were Lydiard base, but then his book was all a whole bunch of shorter, faster stuff, and a lot of, you know, stuff like that, trying to make my, not following what I knew, but trying to follow these books of how do I train these kids. And you know, when you're a first year teacher and a first year head coach at the same time, and you're trying to do all your lesson plans every night to get ready for the 4 different preps you have the next day, and you're trying to get your cross country regimen figured out, and you're just trying to take anything that anybody gives you. And that's what was popular back then. And you're like, well, here's a training plan, let's try to work it. And after a few years, you're like, well, fortunately, I had kept a lot of stuff like morning runs, and, you know, like we would do 6 by 800 or 3 by a mile, some of those workouts. But it's the entire idea of how long do you run on your intermediate run, your long run. Our long runs back then were maybe 7 or 8 miles. You know, now we're going 70 to 90 minutes, which is physiologically, you have to go at least that long in order to get the adaptation to occur for capillarization. So it's understanding the science a little bit better, and then rereading the real stuff, and not what was popular back in the 80s and 90s.
Makes a lot of sense. I've bounced back and forth a lot as well. I've gone through different intellectual phases in my career. And I'm curious, did working with guys like Connor McMillan, Casey Klinger, and Clayton Young challenge you as a coach in any way, or change your perspective on how to work with athletes of varying abilities?
Well, you know, I had already had our type of training in place before them, but it was guys before them. There was a time between 2004 and 2008 that we took second place at state 3 times, and 7 and 8 we were second place, and the boys who were seniors in 09 were like, my team captains were like, we're tired of getting second place, we want to win, what do we have to do, what do we have to change? And I went back and read Lydiard and talked to some coaches, Paul Pilkington at Weber State, talked to him at a coach's clinic, and we become good friends. And it was just getting away from this idea or this philosophy that it's speed which makes you fast in cross country or distance running. And once I made that paradigm shift in our training, and it was a gradual process, like I said, from when I was about to turn 40, so I was 38, that's about year 2000, experimenting with myself and seeing things that weren't working, and then changing it. And then gradually by 2009, when I started having this build the aerobic engine philosophy in place, that's when we started just killing it. And it took 4 or 5 years for the rest of the state to start having other coaches catch up. And now it's like, I got to be on top of my game, because so many coaches I've have helped, or they've gone through programs, you know, they're younger guys who've been in college in the 2000s and the 2010s, and they've had good college coaches, and they're doing this stuff from the get-go instead of having to learn over 35 years what to do. And a lot of them are inquisitive with me, and I'm always glad to share. And so it's that's why I think Utah is, you know, per capita, the strongest cross-country state in the nation. So that's that.
I'm blessed to have access to hundreds of young, eager kids as a PE teacher at the elementary school level. And so this question might be a little selfish, but do you think the path to becoming elite starts when you're like 10 years old? Or do you think
No.
the research is correct that we should hold kids back from specialized training? And until what point would you say?
I grew up in an age where we played sports year round because, like, in our town in Western Illinois, we only had 2 channels of black and white TV. So my friends might have color TV, but we had black and white. So we're outside every day, playing games, making up games, playing ball, 4 or 5 sports a year, all pick up, just all the kids in the neighborhood. That's how we grew up. And so when you specialize early, the kids are not going to get full athletic development. They should be, most kids, the only time they go outside is when mommy and daddy make a play date with some other kid. I don't know, or take them to the park and then sit and watch them. It's kids just don't live like we did. And so I don't think that basis of an athletic upbringing of just play is in our society anymore. It's fine to have. When I had a junior Olympic club my first 10 years at Murray, I ran a jail club in the summer, and actually all we did was make track and field fun for them. We played, made games. We never had really serious training, but it gave them a foundation. I know one year I had a bunch of 9-year-olds, and when they were seniors in high school, their team won state. But it started with just teaching them the fundamentals, having fun with them, getting them to love the sport. If you're training kids too early at too hard a level, they're going to learn to regret it. I know my first year at AF, there was a kid whose dad had helped coach the year before, and it burnt him out so bad because his dad was pushing so hard that he didn't want to run even for me. And that's what happens when you grow up in that pressure cooker. It's got to be fun. And even I talk a lot. We started junior high cross country in our school district 5 years ago. I think this is the 6th year. And the important thing we always talk about to the junior high coaches is here's some basic fundamentals. Got to make it fun. Make sure they run and not walk. They've got to learn right away that you're developing neural pathways in your brain. And one of them is we don't quit. So even if you're slow, keep running. And that's going to benefit them when they come to high school. And never run back with someone who's slower than you. Encourage them to run up with you. But that's a cop out. If you've ever seen a kid that bails in a race, he's just there running with his buddy way back, and it's like he's not improving himself. He's quitting on himself and his team. And one philosophy we always have is negative splits in everything. Always finish faster than you started. And so we try to do that with the junior high, and some kids come up and they think high school is going to be like junior high. We're competitive, but we're going to stay with that same philosophy. And as they get acclimated to the program and invest in their training, start learning how to do it, then they really love it, and they love the team and the other boys on the team, and they continuously improve.
At this point in the cross country season, Coach, you probably have a good idea of how your team is doing. How are you guys ranked this year, and what are your goals moving forward?
Well, this was the 2nd year in a row that we only had two varsity returners. We had 2 boys who were sophomores last year come back. Now, we did have a good move in come in. And so these last 2 years have been really challenging for me as a coach to rebuild, but also to try to be at a high level. I mean, 2 years ago at the end of cross country, I always go through all the returners and see where we ranked according to everybody returning in the state. And 2 years ago, we were ranked 10th in state and 6th in 6A, our classification. And by the end of, one calendar cross country year, at the end of cross country, we were 10th at running lane. And if our number one had not been our sixth man, he had COVID issues for about a year, long COVID. If he had run just what he'd done at running lane the year before, he probably would have been third or fourth. So that's great improvement. I had a good senior squad. So I only had two back this year. At the end of cross last year, we were seated 16th in state and 10th in 6A. Right now, we won our divisional race yesterday and would have been second in the merge. Although Harriman held out four guys, we're ranked something like 19th on mile split nationwide. And I only had four guys under 17 minutes coming back from last year. Our first meet of the year, our team time was like 82 minutes. And now we've had a couple races where our team time is 76 minutes. Those are flat, fast courses. And the first one was really hilly, but still, I've got six guys under 16 minutes for 3 miles at altitude right now. And so that's a great improvement from only having 4 under 17 minutes last year.
And how far away is your state meet?
2 weeks
2 weeks
from yesterday. Yeah.
Is there a chance you guys are going to be, knock on wood, but qualifying for nationals?
Well, the Southwest is the toughest region in the U.S. Last year, we had 9 of the top 17 teams at running lane from our region. Colorado's loaded. They're loaded again this year. I see 3 really good teams, then a couple more kind of bubblish. But Utah, I think, is really loaded this year again. There's about 5 teams that could go to NXN just from being, who are fighting for that top 2 spot. The problem is, there's at the most 2 at-larges. So there's going to be 5 or 6 teams from the Southwest that'll not get to go to NXN. And it's really tight. It's really close right now. We're just doing everything. You can't rush the process, especially with the young group. I only have 1 senior on varsity this year. So you can't rush the process. You just have to be patient. And as they improve gradually, the team gets better. So we'll see what happens. We'll either make it to NXN or we'll go to running lane.
Well
running
said.
lane's a great course, great experience. And Will and Sean, the race directors, are fantastic guys, and they put on a great show over there.
Yeah, and your current situation speaks to that rebuilding process and just how competitive your region is.
Yeah.
So then, Coach, let's get into our training talk portion of the episode where we explore those concepts you've already been talking about that have helped you achieve success in cross country and track. And I want to start with Arthur Lydiard, himself, which I have come to love. And Lydiardism, which is a divisive topic, but similar to you, I benefited tremendously from going back to the original text, like run to the top and running the Lydiard way, and talking to people like Coach Nobby, who Arthur educated and bequeathed with carrying on his legacy. And when I reached out to you, because I was struggling under my own interpretation of Lydiard, I was intrigued because I saw a lot more intensity than I was doing using a so-called Lydiard approach. And Nobby talks a lot about easy running as being one of Lydiard's core principles, but words like easy and steady state can often have different meanings for different people. And I know that Lydiard softened his views in later years when he started helping recreational runners. But before we jump into the weeds, let's get your thoughts on Lydiard in general. Was he just trying to get people to do, and this is 1960s Lydiard now, okay? Was he just trying to get people to do less hard running on the track, interval style training 5 or more times a week, which was the norm back then,
Yeah.
and just do more steady running, not long, slow distance?
Yeah, LSD does not mean long, slow distance. And even my coach, my freshman year, he said, if all you do is long, slow distance, all you're going to be is a long, slow distance runner. You need to run all your runs at the appropriate pace for you. So Lydiard has a quote that says, I found that if I want to run 100 miles a week at my maximum aerobic effort and as many miles as possible, as easy as possible. And so that's why our morning runs are recovery runs. That's where we're going to recover. And our intermediate runs are going to be at aerobic threshold. And so that's what's going to maximize the building of our slow twitch muscle. Our long runs are what's going to maximize capillarization into the muscle tissue and into the lung tissue so that we can transport oxygen through the blood more efficiently. You know, the more blood vessels you have, the more blood, the more oxygen you're going to get to your muscle tissue. And so that's what Lydiard was a proponent of. Easy is a relative term. As I said, our intermediate runs are going to be for a varsity kid, you know, a 15-minute kid, we're going to be around 6-minute pace. I mean, for my varsity guys, that's what we'll do, about 6-minute pace. Even Jack Daniels it's like your 3-mile race pace per mile plus 45 seconds is aerobic threshold. And so I think most coaches, they say easy run, they think that's recovery pace. Well, recovery pace is not easy run pace. My coach, my second coach, he'd say your 3 paces are conversational pace. That's our recovery run pace. You can hold a full conversation speaking in paragraphs. That's recovery run pace. If you can speak in short sentences, that's what usually happens at aerobic threshold. If you can't speak at all, you're at, you know, acidosis threshold, your lactate threshold. And that's when, and so you have to run each run at an appropriate pace. Yeah, I mean, I've talked a lot to Sean Brosnan, who's at UCLA now, the Newberry Park coach, and what he called an easy run for his boys was about 6:20 pace, but you know, they're fast guys. And I think the intermediate run is the most underutilized workout. Most coaches, they're using their intermediate runs for recovery, but that's what our mornings are for. So that's the key component of being able to build the aerobic engine, is doing that aerobic work at your aerobic threshold. That's what's going to help you to be able to run faster for longer.
Yeah,
You know,
and coach, that's why I was intrigued by what I saw from you, because nowadays we keep hearing the whole make sure your easy days are truly easy. And for a lot of people that means a couple minutes slower than your marathon pace, which would be very close to that aerobic threshold.
Marathon pace is 6-minute pace. I've had 2 high school graduates the week after graduation last 2 years. One went 2:43, and he was a cross country kid, but in track, he was a 39-second 300-meter hurdler, and he was running 49 seconds of 400. He does a marathon the week after high school graduation and runs 2:43. Last year, I had my 6th man on varsity. He graduated the week later. He did a marathon in 2:39. That's 6-minute pace. 6:05, 6:20. You know, that's marathon pace. Daniel's marathon pace is aerobic threshold.
Yeah, and I think the difference is that your boys are running their recovery runs in the mornings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so when you're talking to recreational runners and making sure that they take recovery on their easy days, that's not the day to run at marathon pace.
No, no,
Yeah,
but that's when they're recovering. Of
that's right.
course, you need less recovery. Aerobic workouts take 24 hours from which to recover. Anaerobic workouts take 48 hours to recover. But if you're not doing a tremendous amount of anaerobic, which you really don't need, coaches do too much anaerobic and then they have to recover from it. So if we're not doing those, we don't have to recover from it. We can spend more time building the aerobic engine. Yeah, there was a great thing on the Lydiard Academy Facebook page yesterday where he talks about the paces and how Lydiard was, hey, you got to do this year round, the speed year round, not just in that block of your pyramid, you know, the anaerobic phase. It's like you're doing anaerobic all year round, you're not going to lose it. It only takes 4 to 6 weeks. And Tin Man has said, there's only about 4 workouts you have to do to maximize your anaerobic capacity. And if you're racing an 800 in track, there's one of your workouts. So, yeah, we just do. Lydiard also had a quote about no one ever gets burned out from doing aerobic training. It's the anaerobic training which is pushed on us from the American scholastic system, which burns kids out.
One of the questions that we get asked all the time when you say I follow Lydiard training is, oh, do you do the hill springing and the hill bounding? Do you do a dedicated hill phase? Is that true
No, we
for
don't.
you?
No, we're doing hills year round. Matter of fact, today, because of where we live, today they had to run up about a 500-meter hill on our run and then run down it. And we teach proper form. We worked really hard on really good uphill form and especially downhill form because that's leads to a lot of injuries, poor downhill form. And so we're doing hills quite a bit. So we don't have dedicated like 30-meter hill springing or anything like that because next Monday we're going to do the grinder. That's 1.3 miles, 400 feet elevation gate. So we're getting our hills in. We do after our intermediate runs, like today we did a 6-mile run and we did stride laps, kind of like what people think of flying 30s or 150s, where we're gradually accelerating on the straightaways of a track until it's full sprint. And so we're working and getting a little bit of the anaerobic system, but it's not long enough to really, start damaging mitochondria or causing issues. And then they jog the turns, and we just do 2 laps of that. So they're getting 4x100 of a gradual acceleration, and that's worked for us.
And coach, what do you think of the fascination or obsession with Lydiard's 100 miles per week or 10 hours of running per week? Do you think
That's for
that
marathoners. I think that's for people who build up for that. I ran 100-mile weeks in college, but I didn't in high school. We averaged 60, and talking to a lot of really good college coaches over the years and other elite high school coaches, we're all pretty much in agreement that 60 miles a week average. And I've spoken at clinics. Casey Klinger, I think in the 4 years that he was on my varsity, 3 years All-America, 2 years NXN champion, his longest week was about 72 miles. But if you average 60 a week, that's about 3,000 miles a year. And for a high school kid developing, that will set him up for success. You haven't trashed his legs with too much miles. He's going to be ready. He already understands the concepts and the training so that when he goes to college, he'll be able to gradually build up, if he has a good coach in college, build up his mileage to, that 80, 90, 100, 110, 120. Clayton Young, when he was a senior, he's the 10,000 meter champ in 2019 in NCAA, and Connor McMillan took third. Those are two of our alumni. They were getting up 110, 120 by their senior years. And of course they're doing well. Clayton ran 211 in Chicago last Sunday, and Connor ran 212 last year, 2 years ago, 2020 in New York City, or maybe it's 21 or 19. He went 27:40 last spring. So they're doing 120 now, but that's double. I always tell the high school kids, when you get to college, and we want, after Clayton won NCAAs, he came to our summer camp. He goes, our training's just like your training, just 50% more. He was doing 90 miles instead of 60 miles average. So it's good to find programs, collegiate programs with coaches that do the same type of training so they can gradually build up, and then they will keep getting better and better and better.
Yeah, this issue, which I like to call the volume trap, is what did me in. And because I tried to, I placed too much emphasis on volume, or the number of hours I was running per week, and to raise that number, I was forced to run extra slow. So what ended up happening was I was running too slow and not close enough to my aerobic threshold.
Yeah.
But I think it works backwards. You need to focus on what you can handle. Like, and if that's 40 miles a week, that's 40 miles a week. And you build from there.
Yeah. If you look at our training though, we might at aerobic threshold might only be getting 20 to 25 miles a week total. Maybe a max week during the summer, maybe 30 miles at aerobic threshold. And we're getting 50% is at recovery pace. If you count, a 2-mile cool down after a repeat workout, or after a power run, in the mile warm up, and we're getting 50% of our mileage is at recovery pace. But we have 40% at aerobic threshold, and that other 10% might be, the sprints or the repeats at, or our power runs, which are at lactate threshold, at acidosis threshold.
Yeah, and that's what we call pyramidal style periodization, which I think is the way to go, as opposed to polarized, a more polarized style of training, the 80-20 that we keep hearing about. And coach, that's a good segue into me asking you about your power runs. So these power runs that you do, I don't know if you do them every week, and it's going to probably depend on what time of the season it is. But these 2-mile runs that they do about a minute slower than their 2-mile PR, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you read about this, and you mentioned Lydiard's book, Lydiard, Running the Lydiard Way. If you look at it, is the training schedules in the back, he calls these time trials. And then when you read, it's like, no, this is not a time trial. And coaches will read that and think, oh, I got to time trial my boys 2 miles. And this was a problem. I had a coach in track my sophomore year. My cross country coach wasn't coaching that track season, and he was a football coach. He was my driver's ed and PE teacher. So he's coaching track, and he would have me do a 2-mile warm up, 2-mile time trial, a 2-mile cool down every day. And by the time spring break came around, my legs, I couldn't walk. I was so trashed from trying to push 2-mile time trial. But then when you read Lydiard and he explains it, we're doing lactate threshold 2 miles. And, I've known some, Luke Piscadero would do 2 by 10 minutes, 10-minute warm up, 10 minutes at lactate threshold, 10-minute jog, 10 minutes at lactate threshold, and then 10-minute cool down. And I found my boys, it was just too much. So I stuck with Lydiard and just said, we're going to do 2 miles. You don't need to do 3. we're doing 2 miles, and they recover really quickly from it. You know, you're not going, as long as they're not racing during this workout. I had a couple seniors last year that would always try to stay up with guys who were 40 seconds faster than them in the 2 mile. And so they were pushing too hard. They were getting a tremendous amount of acidosis, you know, just too many, not doing it right. They were not at the correct pace. And so I always have to tell the boys, run at your pace, not someone else's. You know what you're supposed to hit. Now hit your pace. And the guys this year, even the young guys, have been really, really good about learning what pace they're supposed to hit in their power runs. And it's been really effective. We did one last Thursday. And I think we have one. Well, we won't do another one until after the state meet, but that was our last one till the state meet.
I was playing with these numbers just for fun. So I was taking a 9-minute 2 miler, which is, you know, that's fast. But let's take someone that can run 2 miles in 9 minutes. They would be doing their power run at 5-minute pace.
Yeah.
Okay. And this power run targets lactate threshold, right?
Right.
So then maybe we just define things differently, and that's okay, because I come from the Jack Daniels school of thought, where he defines lactate threshold as 1 hour race pace. So if you take a 9-minute 2 miler, they cannot hold 5-minute pace for 1 hour, but according to his charts, they can probably hold it for about 35 minutes or 12 kilometers. So maybe the pace that they're running at is closer to what like Tin Man would call critical velocity.
That critical velocity is a little slower than critical velocity, or critical velocity is a little bit slower than that lactate threshold.
Actually, critical velocity is faster than lactate threshold. But it's not by much. So maybe we're just splitting hairs. But what I mean is, like, maybe what I would do, and you know, you're the greatest here. I'm just, you know, I don't have your resume, but like, instead of doing 10 minutes at this pace, maybe they can extend the time that they're running at, but slow it down. So maybe instead of 5-minute pace, they do 5:08 pace, and then they can do 20 minutes of that amount of work. Or even break it up into cruise intervals so they can spend more time in that zone.
I know some coaches that break it down into, they'll do 5-minute segments or 7-minute segments. I just, following Lydiard, I found that 2 miles is, it's like being in the bed that's just right. You know, it's not too much where they're going to be hammered next day and you'll have to take some recovery because they actually were in that threshold range for too long, and it's fast enough that they are getting that the benefit. They're going to get the adaptation occur in you know, in their buffering system. So I think Lydiard had it spot on, and I've been following him we've been doing power runs for 16, 17 years, and it's been really effective. So
yeah, and there's a lot of research showing that training at that critical velocity pace creates a lot of favorable adaptations.
Yeah.
So and so one of the things that you said you changed when you got to American Fork was you added morning recovery runs.
No, I've always done them, even at Murray. That's one of the good things that I took with me from high school that helped us out. Problem at Murray was, one, we weren't meeting enough during the summer, so the kids weren't getting enough summer mileage. And two, like I said, our runs weren't long enough, and we were doing too much anaerobic. We're doing too much hard, fast stuff. And which is still a common model for a lot of coaches.
Yeah, and I think this addition, or the morning recovery runs, this might be the most underrated element of training, and probably it's not the most sexy of the workouts that you're doing, obviously, but it might be also the reason why your boys are able to handle so much intensity throughout the week, because you're doing a grinder, you're doing, on certain weeks you might be doing mile repeats at 5K pace, your power run plus the capillary run at a good aerobic threshold pace. Without those recovery runs in the morning, do you think they'd be able to handle this much intensity?
No, I think, well, there's so many benefits to morning runs. The science has based this out, for one, there's a lot of hormones that are released when you work out in the morning. And it benefits them in their schoolwork. They get the best parking spots, obviously, because we're there before everybody else. It definitely helps with the camaraderie of the team bonding. And I'm convinced from, you might say, anecdotal evidence, but 35 years of watching kids who at one time did morning runs, then stopped for some reason, like they had an early morning class or had to go off campus for a class or just got lazy, that that extra 20 miles, for us to get to 60 miles, we're doing about 40 in the afternoons because we don't run on Sundays. That's almost a third or about a third of our training, and that's worth about 30 seconds off their 5K time. So that's 2.5 minutes off your team time just by incorporating morning runs. And I know a lot of teams in Utah, all the best teams do morning recovery runs now. And it certainly helped their team times improve. I mean, the state, we're getting down, instead of us being the only team under 80 minutes, there might be 4 or 5 teams under 80 minutes for team time now.
I wish I had incorporated doubles when I was younger and my body wasn't as beat up as it is now, because there is something to that. And Coach, you're also probably friends with someone like Ed Eyestone at BYU, or at least you've spoken to him before. I'm curious how you would take someone like a Clayton Young post graduation, and if you had to develop him further, if you were his professional coach, how would you modify the system you have now to fit someone like that? Would you be adding more volume? Is that the direction?
Well, yeah, 60 miles is not enough for a professional runner, especially when they're training for things like 10Ks, 15Ks, road races, or half marathons or marathons. That's definitely not enough training. I'm not training my high school kids to run a marathon. And I tell them, once you graduate, if you want my help to train for marathon, I'll do that with you. But yeah, Clayton's one said, he's doing pretty good. He trains with the group with Jared Ward, Olympian, and all those guys, and they have a great training group, and I've run into them when I've been on a bike ride. I'll get extra. They're just cruising along at 6-minute pace for 20 miles. And like I said, Clayton told our kids, my training is like yours, it's just more.
Yeah. So the structure wouldn't change, the workouts wouldn't change, but you would add some more volume.
Yeah, definitely. In college, you're doing 6 by or 10 by 1,000, while we're doing 5 by 1,000.
Yeah. And I love the VO2 max repeats that you do, like the 6 by 800, the 3 by 1 mile workouts, which you focus more on now as a coach than you did 30 years ago when you were prescribing 400s on short rest and at too fast a pace. But my question about those repeats is, if they're not running 3 by mile every week, which I don't believe they are, maybe you do that session 3 times in a season.
Yeah, we do it once in August. We did it late September, and then we'll do it in early November.
So what's the VO2 max stimulus on those other weeks? Are you trying to hit on that pace every week?
Well, I try to vary it. We go different places. I like 5 by 1,000, 6 by 800, 4 by 1,200. The boys kind of like 4 by 1,200. They love the thousands. And when we have state in 13 days. So next week is a tune-up workout. We'll do 4 800s instead of 6. And we always try to start at 3-mile race pace and then hit negative splits 1 or 2 seconds to repeat. Because once again, that's one of our points of emphasis in our program is negative splits and everything. If you're not training that way, you can't expect to race that way. You race how you train. And if you're not doing it in practice, you're not going to do it in a race.
And once again, I love that your focus is on building the aerobic engine. I don't think any coach would disagree that if we're ranking the variables that would best determine your performance in a mile race all the way up to a marathon, the aerobic engine and securing those metabolic adaptations is top of the list. But a vast majority of the coaches that I talk to also stress the importance of speed development. Now, I've heard you say that speed is a function of endurance, and I agree. But do you devote any part of your training to what we might call just pure leg speed?
Like I said, stride laps at the end of our repeat, at the end of our stride laps at the end of our intermediate runs, where they are accelerating to full sprint speed. And at the end of repeat workouts, regardless of whether we're doing 800s or miles, we always end it with a kick simulation. So if a boy is, let's say a varsity boy is used to kicking about 200 meters, he'll pick the last 200-meter point, and on the last repeat, he will practice that kick. And yeah, there are times of the year that we've done, over spring break, we'll do 16 by 200, but we'll start at 2-mile race pace and gradually get down and do a kick sim on the last one. But they're not hammering, like 8 quarters at 59. I won't do a workout like that. If we do 8 quarters, we didn't even do 8 400s last year in track, just because of how meets scheduled out. If we start quarters, they'll start at 2-mile race pace and get gradually faster. We do 16 400s in August just to give them a little leg turnover and work a little anaerobic, but we'll start at 3. The varsity guys will start at about 72, 73, and then gradually work down. But no, we're not going to do a monster anaerobic workout where they're laying on the track dead afterwards. It'll take too long to recover. It's I don't think the payoff is there. We're, when I did all those hard quarters and 200s with the guys, my first 10 years coaching, we didn't have a single kid break 2 minutes or 4:30. And now, like last year with the train we had 6 guys under 2 minutes, and 4:30. It's like you don't even get to go on the bus to varsity race if you're not under 4:30. 4:20 is, I think we had 5 guys under 4:20. So at that, and those are at altitude. So, I've taught it at clinics and said, okay, would a 5-minute flat kid make your varsity if you had a 4x1600? You're like, no. 5 flat. Last year we had 23 boys and 19 of them broke 5 flat at altitude. So 5 flat's not that big, but what if he can string 3 5 flats together? That's a 15-minute kid. He's going to be state class and possibly national class. So how do you get them to be able to sustain that? It's not from doing a buttload of hard 400s.
Yeah, I agree with you that those 200s and 400s, that's working a different energy system. There's too much anaerobic glycolysis there. What I'm hearing from other coaches is the really short work, like 30-meter flies, 50-meter flies, where you're working the creatine phosphate system more like to build your explosiveness off the ground, or the mini hurdle drills that other coaches are doing, the plyometric circuits that they do on the track, or even some of the heavy lifting that they do in the gym for speed development.
like I said, we'll do our stride laps and before, and we'll also do striders before our repeat workouts where they're gradually, each one is consecutively faster till they're full sprint. The last one, we want to get vasodilation going before we hit our workout. But that's it, kick sim and stride laps. And I think that's sufficient. Certainly work for us. No, I'm not going to hammer them so they're laying on the ground. We do work out in the weight room 3 times a week, and then we do core 2 times a week, and then we do pull-ups, dips, and crunches every morning after our recovery run. So we are in the weight room. Definitely, coaches. I've I've had a bunch of kids move in from out of state this year, four move-ins, and all of them said, no, we didn't lift in our previous program. And it's like, that was proven in the 60s. I mean, strength is a component of distance running. Strength, weight room strength is going to help in injury prevention. It's going to help you with better form. And it's going to help strengthen we do dumbbells. So it's going to help strengthen your core because you're standing. And all we do is 4 things. We do bench press, we do forearm curls, we do dumbbell runners, which is, and we do some type of tricep exercise. Most guys do back scratchers. And, 2 to 3 sets, 8 to 12 reps. We talk about how do you know when you're supposed to increase weight. So I got guys that can bench, regularly. They're benching 135 or 155. So we're getting that strength component. That's one of the 4 components of distance running. So
I was going to ask you.
Morning.
I'm sorry, Coach, for interrupting. I was going to ask you about the core work that you do because I think that's extremely important. Could you just briefly describe maybe just 2 or 3 exercises that you might do, like planks or bridges? Is that the type of core work you're doing?
Yeah, we do. We have an 8-minute. It's kind of like 8-minute abs. It's like I was trying to get the boys to do more than just their crunches in the morning. And so when we're lifting, I was doing a lot of stuff, and I couldn't get the guys to invest in it. And so I had one year some guys who were on the sophomore basketball team, and their coach was having them do this regimen that took about 8 minutes. And so I said, well, why don't we have the whole team do it? And so we started doing it every Tuesday and Thursday after our run and after our team stretch. And we call it mega abs. And it's we do a raised, I think we have like 6 or 7 exercises. We do a raised with a dumbbell plate. You do a raised crunch, put on a chest, a dumbbell, or not a dumbbell, but a plate, a weighted plate. I'll use 35 pounds for me. 45s are just too unwieldy. And then you put on your chest and do crunches. We'll do sets of 20, set of 25 each exercise, and then you do each side obliques. So there's another 25 each side obliques with the weighted, and then we'll do leg lifts or V-sits, whatever you want to call them. For a count of 25, we'll do bicycle kicks for bicycles for 25. Then we'll do planks, and we build up. We might start at 60 seconds, go up to about 75, 80 seconds by the end of the season. And then we'll do around the world. It's where you crunch across your body, count of 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we'll do a set of 25 of that. So that takes, if they really work hard, they can get done in about 6 minutes. But it's like an 8-minute abs program. We just do that Tuesday, Thursday, and they're doing 40 crunches every morning. I do 100. I do 100 every morning and every evening because I'm old, so I gotta do more than them.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. And I just have a couple more questions. These are related to racing. I know you're a big believer in negative splits.
Yeah.
So let's say someone is trying to run 5:30 pace for 5K, so like a 17:05. Let's just use that example. Would you counsel this runner in a time trial situation, not a cross country race, because obviously then you throw time out the window, but if this was like a time trial, someone's going for a PR on the road, would you want this runner to go through the first mile in 5:30 or slower and try to get faster as the race progresses? Or what's your feeling on pacing for 5K?
Well, most kids who are that slow, they haven't built up their aerobic system where they can hit negative splits. They're just not strong enough yet, mentally or physically. I don't think so. I would say, okay, if you want to hit 5:30 pace, start at 5:30, and that means you better be 2:45 at the 800 and not 2:20 at the 800. This is the thing I've had to teach some of my freshmen this year, because they get excited and they want to go out, and or they panic because they see every other team going out really hard, and they panic and they say, I got to stay up with them. And it's like, no, run your race, hit your pace, you'll be fine. You'll pass those guys later. And when they start learning to hit the first mile at the right pace, then they can start progressing, and maybe they hit 2 miles at their goal pace, or all 3 miles at their goal pace, and maybe hit negative splits in the last mile. And there's some meets where I always try to get their mile splits so we can see, are they going out too fast and then slowing down, or are they pacing right? And then it amazes them, if they've been real consistent in their training, how they can, even if they're a freshman or a JV guy, they can hit negative splits. The problem then you have to work on is, do they slow down their second mile? They fall back into running a race instead of racing guys, which is a common error of a lot of kids. They get in they fall back in their comfort zone, or they think that they have to save something for the last mile. And so they'll slow down that second mile. And you can spot that if you're taking mile splits and saying, hey, you can keep it up. Trust in your training. You'll have it for the last mile, and you'll be able to hit negative splits. Once they start doing it, it becomes second nature to them, and that's when they really start excelling in the racing. So I try to teach them, the first half is pace, the second half is race, beating kids, roadkill.
Yeah, and like you said, it's extremely hard to do for someone who is underdeveloped aerobically. I know, like, my top 3 times for 5K were even to slightly positive split. But I can run a negative split if I'm sandbagging the first mile, of course.
Well, it's not sandbagging if you're hitting pace.
Yeah, but like if you run 30 seconds slower to a minute slower than your PR, and you feel great,
No.
you feel great towards the end of the race, but you're sandbagging it. So
No.
Coach, one more question here about racing. I've talked to a lot of old school Lydiard guys who believe that racing often can be quite good for you, like racing yourself into fitness. And of course, the question is, how much is too much during what part of the season and at what point in someone's long-term development? But do you think the amount of racing that we pack into a season, both at the high school and college level, does a disservice to kids physiologically?
That's one thing that hopefully coaches have learned over COVID, because in COVID, you hardly had any races at all. And so when someone got an opportunity to race, whether they were elite level or collegiate or high school, they popped big times because they weren't over raced. And I've had the discussion with coaches recently where I'm concerned that now that a lot of COVID restrictions, as they've been lifted, coaches are just going back. They didn't learn their lesson, that less racing made for faster racing. And they're going back and they're over racing their kids again. And I think, the seniors this year are the kids who were freshmen, sophomores, the first year of COVID, right? It was during their sophomore track season. And so they were already indoctrinated into running, and they got that giant block of training for 6 months, a year and a half with less racing. And that's why times are so phenomenal this last track season, last year in cross country, so incredibly fast, and coaches are going to forget or not learn those lessons. And we're going to see a decline in performance over the next 2-3 years. And I've been worried about that, but I see that happening because I can see how much coaches race their kids. I mean, I don't in track, I usually would not race my guy more than one race at a track meet, unless there's some specific thing we were trying to do, like prepare for the state meet, or prepare for Arcadia Invitational, where I would have them run an open 800 and then the 4x4 as a speed workout the week before, or, in the past, I've had, let's say, a 9-minute guy, and he would run the 3200 at a dual meet, but he's using that as I'm sorry, that's someone that's I supposed to call.
That's okay.
Where I would run him in a power run and he would just pace everybody else, but he would hit 10 minutes. So we would get kids break 10 minutes for the first time because they would just try to stick with this guy who's doing a power run at a dual meet. So we would use that as a workout. And so killed two birds with one stone. And we got a lot of kids sub 10 that way because they were following this guy who was just doing a power run.
I agree with you. I think there's danger to over racing, but the funny thing is we've been talking about Lydiard mostly during our conversation, and a lot of the so-called Lydiard guys will point to Peter Snell's racing schedule, all of Arthur's boys who used to race very often for their club in New Zealand. But
you think of Steve Scott, how do you get 136 sub 4-minute miles? He had to race a lot, but that's how he had to make his living. And if you read Craig Virgin's book, he was my idol growing up in Illinois, coming just right after him. That he had to race all the time, but that's how he made his living. And so, that's why the Kenyans go to all these races. That's how they're making their living. But for a high school kid, no, I mean, my varsity boys, we have a 3-race kind of state series, region, divisional, state. So before that, some of them had only raced 3 times during the season. They'll do a postseason meet a couple of weeks before regionals. We have regionals and then a nationals. So they're getting 9 in from the end of August to the start of December. They're only getting 9 or 10 races. My JV, I might put in a couple more. There's one race I take my JV, run them varsity, but they need practice to learn how to race. So I might race them a little more, but never more than once a week. Twice a week. I mean, I did that in high school, and that was just brutal. The best race I had my senior year in high school is the race I was sick for the dual meet. So I didn't race it. And then I was fresh for the meet on Saturday and got a PR.
Yeah, that's way more optimal. Like you said, maybe in the past it was necessary, but it was not optimal preparation.
No, I think there's times in the season where you might be able to go every week. But for me, I prefer every 10 to 14 days. Most collegiates will, when I was in college, every other week. You can handle that, for 5-mile races.
Okay, Coach, let's wrap up with our rapid fire segment. This is just a series of questions, just a handful of questions. And the challenge is to try to answer these questions in a sentence or less.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one is, what's the biggest mistake you think runners make with their training?
Not enough aerobic, too much anaerobic.
What's one of your favorite sessions on the track for a miler?
We rarely train on the track. We'll train on grass, or I like 5 by 800 on the grass.
Okay, and apart from running itself, what do you think is the next most important element of training?
Rest and recovery, eat right, sleep right, hydrate, do your homework. I say that at the end of practice every day.
And lastly, who is your favorite runner, or what is your favorite race, or maybe your favorite moment in athletics history?
I've got two posters in my downstairs man cave. One is La Severin in the 72 Olympics in the 5,000. Over his shoulder are Gamudi, Stewart, and Pre. La Severin was my first running idol. My mom's from Finland. That's why my name's Timo. So he was the first guy that I recognized, him. And then Frank Shorter, of course, winning the Olympics. And then Craig Virgin. My other poster is a signed poster by Craig Virgin. And of course, if you grew up in Illinois in the 70s, he was the man.
You can't go wrong with any of those choices. I love it, Coach. Is there anything I left out today during our discussion, or would you like to leave us with any parting message?
Oh, just when you build the aerobic engine, you want 8 cylinders, not 6.
Well said. Thank you, Timo, for sharing your story and all your wisdom. It's been an honor for me. I'm always learning from coaches like you, and this one, because of our shared Lydiard background, was especially meaningful to me.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
If people want to get to know more about you or support your work in any way, what would be the best way for them to follow you?
Just Google American Fork Cross Country. We have a blog, we have a Facebook page, we have a website. Yeah, one of those things, you're going to find everything.
I'll leave that stuff in the show notes. And so for Timo Mostert, I'm Jonathan Mederos, reminding everyone to run with joy and give thanks every day for the gift we have, the gift of running.
Thank you.
Thank you, Timo. We're signing out here.